Shabbat Shalom, everybody. We invite you to gather your candles around, your family, if they're with you, to gather close. And for those who are connecting through all of these different ways, through computer or TV, to know that we are all close to each other this evening as we welcome each other to this very special Shabbat in which we join hundreds or even thousands of congregations to celebrate the value of welcoming those who are in need of a home into our country, and knowing that in our history, like so many other people's history, that we would not be where we are today if someone had not welcomed us. And so I'll begin with this prayer before we light our candles. May the doors of our homes and our synagogues and our community and our country be wide enough to receive all who hunger for love and all who are lonely for friendship. May it welcome all who have cares to unburden and thanks to express and hopes to nurture. May the doors of our synagogues, our homes, and our country shut out the pettiness and pride, envy and enmity, as they become a threshold that proves to be no stumbling block to young or straying feet. And so too, may our community be for all who enter at the doorway to a richer and more meaningful life. As we celebrate this Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society Shabbat, Refugee Shabbat, we light our candles now with our blessing, and we invite you to join with us. You can follow along page 2 in our prayer books.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kedeshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lehadlik ner shel Shabbat.
Tonight, as we celebrate Shabbat, we focus on this one particular issue, the issue of welcoming strangers into our country, people in particular who have suffered. Tonight we'll use the term refugees. Refugees in our country refers to a very specific type of immigrant. Not every immigrant is a refugee. Not everybody who seeks asylum is a refugee. Refugees refer to people who are fleeing their land out of threat for their own life. And we will this evening hear the story of Vladimir Roth, who some 50 years ago came into our country, and a few years after that into our Jewish community, and who has now the ability to look back on his life and see the great benefit of those choices that he made. I want to share a few facts about refugees because too often in our world, especially when there is so much information thrown at us and words casually thrown around, we don't understand, and sometimes we ourselves misuse terms. There are now an estimated to be more than 80 million people who've been forcibly displaced due to persecution and violence in our world today. 85% of refugees are being hosted in what we would consider developing countries, largely because of the geography that these are the countries closest to the conflict zones where people are fleeing for their lives. 68% of the world's refugees come from just 5 countries: Syria, Venezuela, Afghanistan, South Sudan, and Myanmar. 40% of refugees are under the age of 18. Most refugees, almost more than half of refugees, are children, in fact. Here in the U.S., we've been resettling refugees for decades, especially after World War II. The resettlement that was the greatest benefit to the Jewish people in America, when Congress enacted the first refugee legislation providing refuge for over 650,000 displaced Europeans. And yet, as we look back on our history, knowing that 650,000 was not nearly enough, we've seen a dramatic drop in these most recent years. of refugees being welcomed to our country. By comparison, in 2016, 85,000 refugees were welcomed, and just last year, the number fell in part due to the virus, but it also due to other political factors, to the fact that we only had just under 12,000 refugees. And yet, what we know is that those who are refugees in our country are some of the most vetted individuals who enter our country and undergo security checks. They're vetted by the Department of Homeland Security, and on average, 82% of them participate in the labor force, which compares to just 62% of the national average of adults. So tonight, we turn our focus to the great importance that that legislation played in the building of our community and to how we can help other communities find refuge as we have in this country of ours. And so we will begin our service with words of welcome, page 13 in our prayer books, the words of Shiru Ladonai.
Shir Ladonai, Shir Chadash, Shir Ladonai, Kol Haaretz. Shir Ladonai, Shir Chadash, Shir Ladonai, Kol Haaretz. Yadadai-dai-dai-dai-dai-dai, 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 Yadadai-dai-dai-dai, Yadadai-dai-dai-dai-dai-dai, 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 Yadadai-dai-dai. Shir Ladonai, Baruch Hu Shemo, Patru miyom eleyom, Yeshuato. Shir Ladonai, Baruch Hu Shemo, Patru miyom eleyom, Yeshuato.
We take a moment to walk back through our week, to think of where we were just 7 days ago, but I want to encourage you also, those who are online, especially who can type into the chat, to think about where we've come from prior to this as part of our theme for tonight. And so if you're able to put into the chat, let us know where has your family been prior to being in America? What country of origin did they come to these shores and to this city from? So that we can see the varied places. We did this a few years ago during our Seder. We put a map out and had everybody put a pin on the map to show all the places where we've come from. And tonight we'll do that online, and so we invite you to place in the chat where your family has come from prior to America. And we'll think about all of those places and those journeys as we sit in this moment and welcome Shabbat into our homes with the words of Lechad Odi, page 20 in our prayer book, page 138 if you have the full-size prayer book. As we welcome Shabbat, please join with us.
Lechad Odi, Likrat Kala, Panei Shabbat, Lekabela. Lechad Odi, Likrat Kala, Panei Shabbat, Lekabela. Shavor v'zachor, v'dibur echad hishmi'anu, Elam yochad, Adonai echad, Hu Shemo echad, Shemo tiferet v'litila. סוף מעשה במשכבה תחילה. לך דודי לקראת קהלה, פני שבת נקבלה. לך דודי לקראת קהלה, פני שבת נקבלה. התעוררי, התעוררי, כי באורך קומי אורי, 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 שיר דברי כבוד אדוני עלייך נגלה. לך דודי לקראת קהלה, פני שבת נקבלה. לך דודי לקראת קהלה, פני שבת נקבלה. Please rise and face the entrance to your home. בואי ושלום, עטרת בעלה, גם בשמחה ובשוכלה, תוך אמונה עם סגולה. בואי חלה, בואי חלה, לך דודי, אמן.
We turn now to page 28 as we rise and face east for our words of the Baruch Hu, our call to worship.
Baruch Hu et Adonai HaMevorach Baruch Adonai HaMevorach HaMevorach Le'olam Va'id. HaMevorach HaMevorach Le'olam Va'id.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bidvaro ma'ariv aravim. Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, ruler of the universe, who allows this evening to come into being, skillfully opening the gates, thoughtfully altering time, and allowing the seasons to change. Allow us to do the same. Allow us to see the difference between light and dark. Allow us to be open to see the stranger as we welcome them into our community. Just as Adonai Tzavaot is your name, ever-living God, so may you reign continually over us into eternity. Baruch atah Adonai hama'ariv aravim. Blessed are you, Adonai, who brings on the evening, and so may we be blessed as we find ways to make changes in our world, as you do every evening. Page 32.
Ahavat olam beit Yisrael amecha ahavta amcha ahavta Torah umitzvot chukim umishpatim otanu limadeta Aken Adonai Eloheinu b'shachmeinu ופקומנו משיח בחוקיך, ונשמח בדברי תורתך, ונשמותיך לעולם ועיר. כי הם חיינו ואורך ימינו, ובאים נגע יומם ולילה, נגיע יומם ולילה. ואהבתך תסיר ממנו לעולמים. ברוך אתה אדוני אוהב עמו ישראל, אוהב עמו ישראל.
Shema, page 34 and 35.
Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Baruchim kivud malachuto leolam va'id. Please be seated and join me in chanting V'ahavta. V'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha b'chol lebavcha u'b'chol nafshecha u'b'chol meodecha, v'hayu hadavarim ha'ele asher anochi metzavacha hayom el levavecha, v'shinatam levanecha v'dibarta pam v'shivtecha b'veitecha u'v'lektecha v'derech u'v'shokbecha u'v'kumecha u'kshartam le'ot al yadecha v'hayu letotafot b'neinecha u'ktavtam al mezuzot beitecha u'v'isharecha למען תזכרו ועשיתם את כל מצוותיי והייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם. אני אדוני אלוהיכם אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים להיות לכם לאלוהים. אני אדוני אלוהיכם.
We share this prayer that synagogues across our country are sharing this evening. As we recall that ancient journey from slavery to freedom, we think also of the many times throughout history that our people have wandered in search of safety. From Tsarist Russia to the horrors of the Holocaust, persecution in Iran to the former Soviet Union and Cuba and Ethiopia, time and again we have found ourselves forced out of our homelands for being who we are. And yet each time we were held together by community and assisted by those who risked their safety and protection of ours. Recalling our exodus from Egypt, the Torah tells us, "You know the soul of the stranger." We pray this evening that our commitment to welcome overflow, lead us to take bold action in support of refugees and asylum seekers from every corner of the earth. Just as the Jewish people have thrived, so too do today's refugees of all faiths and ethnicities thrive as they rebuild their lives and become part of their new communities. And so we continue creating and repairing the world as we build our communities on that collective strength of each individual carrying someone else, remembering that we are stronger and strongest when we come together. We share now the words of Micha Mocha, our song that dates back to the story that we first tell of the moment we sensed that we were safe and free. Page 40.
Mi chamocha ba'elim Adonai, mi kamocha nedar b'kodesh. Nora tehilot, O seifele, Nora tehilot, O seifele. Malachutecha, Rauvanecha, Bokeyayam, Lifnei Moshe u'Miriam, Zeli anu be'omeru, Adonai imloch, Adonai imloch, le'olam va'id.
Page 42.
V'shameru b'nei Yisrael et HaShabbat, la'atzot et HaShabbat ledorotam berit olam beni uvi b'nei Yisrael uti le'olam ki sheshet yamim Adonai et hashamayim ve'et haaretz uvayom hashvi Shabbat va'inava.
The Amidah first begins with words in which we ask for the strength to pray, but then immediately turns us towards those first names, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah, so many of those names, the names of our parents and grandparents, names that have been passed on through the generations, that recall all the places we've been. And so we walk back through history before we come to the present and end our Amidah in a few moments with our personal prayers for this particular place that we are in at this particular time. We invite you to rise, page 46.
Adonai sifatai tiftach ufi agita hilatecha. Adonai, open up my lips that my mouth may declare your praise. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu v'Elohei avotenu v'imotenu, Elohei Avraham, Elohei Yitzhak, v'Elohei Yaakov, Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachav, Elohei Leah, Ha'el Hagadol, Hagibor v'Hanara, El Elyon, Gomel Chasadim Tovim, V'Konei Hakol, V'Zocher Chastei Avot V'Imahot, Umevi Geula Livnei V'Nehem, L'ma'an Shemo Be'ahava, Melech Ozer U'Moshia U'Magen, Baruch atah Adonai, Magen Avraham Ve'ezra Tzara, Atah Gibor Le'olam Adonai, Mechayeh HaKol atah Rav Lehoshia, Mashiv HaRuach U'Morid HaGashem. Mechakel Chaim Bechesed, Mechayeh HaKol Berachamim Rabim, Somech Noflim V'Rafech Olim, Umatir Asurim, Umekayem Emunato, Lishenei Afar, Michamocha Ba'al Gevurot, Umido Melach, Melech Meimit Umechayeh, Umatmiach Yeshua, V'ne'emana talachayota kol baruch ata Adonai mechaye hakol.
So often we share these words in the midst of our Amidah that we find these days to be restful. And yet rest, we must remind ourselves, especially on Shabbatot like this one, that in itself is a privilege. And so let us remind ourselves that we are privileged enough to make these hours a day of rest and renewal, to open our hearts to joy and our minds to truth, and that there are those who struggle just for the ability to have time to rest as they flee for their lives. There are those who suffer and they seek solace. There are those who hurt, who wait for the day when they could find healing. So that our prayers on this day are not just a privilege of our lives, but are a prayer for everyone to have the ability to have a Shabbat as we do. That all who despair find purpose, all who hunger find fulfillment, and that this day, for all who seek it, fulfill its promise. Baruch atah Adonai mekadesh ha-Shabbat. Prayer for the greatest source of peace. Shalom Rav.
Shalom Rava Yisrael Amecha Tasim Leolam. Shalom Rava Yisrael Amecha Tasim Leolam. Grant us peace all over the earth. Grant us peace all over the earth. Bless us in every season. Bless us in every moment. Bless us in every season. Bless us in every moment. Shalom Rava Yisrael Amecha Tasim Leolam. Shalom Rava Yisrael Amecha Tasim Leolam. Please take a few moments for silent meditation. Shalom Bimromav Uyaseh Shalom Aleinu Ve'akol Yisrael Ve'akol Yoshvei Tevel Ve'imru Amen.
It is a great honor to invite Vladimir Roth as our speaker this evening. We recorded this interview earlier so that he could tell us his story, which is very much part of our story. And so we will let that speak for itself as we invite now you to enjoy and learn from this discussion I had earlier with Vlad. Wonderful to be here with Vlad Roth and to share a little bit about him before he starts to speak. So Vlad was born and grew up in a small town of Rušomberok. Did I say that correctly?
Yes, you did.
Good. Okay. In the former Czechoslovakia, and after finishing college, his sophomore year, he went to work and then hitchhike in Denmark. During the summer of '68. On August 21st, 1968, the Soviet Union invaded Czechoslovakia in order to suppress the liberalization process known as the Prague Spring. Vlad at that time decided not to return, and with the help of Hayes, who we are celebrating this Shabbat with, the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, he arrived alone as a refugee in New York City, April 1st, 1969. He finished his undergraduate degree in aerospace engineering at Brooklyn Polytechnic in 1971, and then went to the engineering school at NYU. I'm going to stop his story there and let him share more about it. So, Vlad, please tell us about your life between that time and now, how you got to Akron, Ohio, and then we'll talk a little bit more specifically about your story of immigration.
Well, thank you, Rabbi, for the introduction. And I'll correct you a little bit. I actually went to graduate school at Rensselaer Polytechnic after I finished in New York, and got my doctorate there in engineering. And then I stayed there for 4 years after graduating as a research faculty. And then we came to Akron in 1981. And that was because of a job at Firestone, for whom I worked for more or less 30 plus years, and I retired in 2014. Well, what should I say? My sons went through the Akron public schools, but also through the Temple Israel religious education. They were both bar mitzvah at Temple Israel quite a number of years ago.
And where do they live now?
Well, Daniel, the older one, is a lawyer. He lives in Oakland, California, as one child. And Gabriel, the younger one, lives in Park City, Utah. So, I consider Akron my home because that's the place where I have lived for longest in my life. And I really do enjoy West Akron. I enjoy the parks. I like the proximity of Cleveland and what Cleveland has to offer. What else? One thing I miss is the mountains. So, although the parks are sort of a small substitute for that.
So you miss the mountains in Czechoslovakia?
Yeah. I was born in north central Slovakia, which has a lot of mountains. In fact, the Rušomberok, the little town that I was born in, is sort of nestled in the mountains. There was skiing and hiking and that kind of stuff.
So why come to America then? Tell us about the decision process for you.
Well, it's sort of maybe not very typical. I came by myself. My parents didn't feel, first of all, I came because on August 21st, 1968, Soviet Union invaded Czechoslovakia to suppress what was known as Prague Spring. It was a liberalization process of the system that the Soviets could not allow to happen because that would endanger the rest of the Warsaw Pact, countries. So, and I was very attuned to the political situation in the country before. And so I knew what was coming. And it actually became then very oppressive, very conservative communist system. And I just finished the second year. I finished my sophomore year at college, and basically I then decided that I'm not going to come back. As you in your introduction, you mentioned I was in Denmark. That doesn't sound like anything, but we were not allowed to travel for many years, even in Eastern Europe, and to go to Western Europe. That was one of the results of the liberalization known as Prague Spring. And so I was able to go to Denmark with a friend. We were working and on a construction site, and then we were going to hitchhike. Sorry, no hijacking. And then when this happened, I basically decided not to go back. And long story, but I went to London where my sister was, and there I eventually decided to come to the United States through HIAS. And
so why the United States? Why not stay in London? What's the? I mean,
I was going to go. I needed to continue my school, my university. And I applied at the Imperial College, which in London, in the University of London, and I was not hearing from them. So I said, no, I can't wait that long. And eventually, actually, I was accepted both. But I decided basically to come to the US because and that's, as a 20-year-old kid, coming from a country where there was not enough information about the Western world, my knowledge of the United States was limited. But I still I was deciding between Israel and in the United States, and because of the language, I already spoke some English. So the Hebrew really sounded like a very difficult language for me. And then I decided to come to the US. That was the idea that I had. And so I went through HIAS, and I went to HIAS in London, and they said, if you want to go to the US, you cannot go from London. You can decide you can go from Paris or from Rome. And I decided for Paris. So I spent over 3 months then in Paris, waiting for the American immigration visa. And then, when you say, I spent 3 months in Paris, that's not like when you go to Paris for 3 months. I was studying English because I knew what I needed, and I didn't have money, and many other things. But eventually, I went through the process and arrived. It will be actually next month, April 1st, 1969, 52 years ago next month. I arrived.
I'm curious what you thought. First of all, tell us how you arrived. I assume you flew.
Yes.
And then
yes.
tell us what you thought. What were your first impressions of America back then? Do you remember?
Well, this will be interesting, and no insult to anybody. I have not seen an African American, a Black person, except being in Prague a few times in my life. And maybe there were some diplomats from African countries or Arab countries and some students. So when I landed at the Kennedy airport, I was sort of struck by seeing all these Black people, African Americans, at the airport. I sort of remember that. The other thing I remember, when I had a window seat, and so when we were flying, well, across the ocean, as probably everybody did. And then we started flying over the East Coast, which I didn't know exactly how that works. And I saw these lights, and it took half an hour, 45 minutes to fly over the East Coast until getting to New York. I said, wow, this New York must be so big because of all these lights. But of course, that's sort of interesting thing that I remember. But then landing in New York, and our organization that took care of us, actually, even in Paris, there was like a Jewish agency called Kojasor. I don't know exactly what it stands for. In New York, they handed us to an agency. The highest people were there, but they handed us off to an agency called NYANA, New York Association for New Americans. And they were extremely helpful. They basically arranged for me to go back to school in 2 months or 3 months. Well, yeah, I started in June. I came in April and started in June. So
that's tell us a little bit about that for those of us who have not had that experience. What do we not understand about all those?
I want to tell you. Well, first of all, I went to work right away. I had 3 jobs. I was selling Encyclopedia Britannica for about 2 weeks, which I couldn't do. Then I was working for some kind of a drafting company. I was drafting, because of my engineering background, power lines in Manhattan. Then I got another job. I was a handyman working for the billboard company on there's a billboard building on 42nd Street in New York. So many times I was taking care of the little garden on the top of this semi-skyscraper that most people would never be able to get in. There was a little garden on the top that I was taking care of. And then I went to school. Should I say any more?
It's well, I'm curious, how did you feel you were received by people? I assume your English was probably not, and right now your English today is great, but I assume when you first came here, it was probably obvious that you were.
It was not that good. But again, in New York, you have people from all over the world, so I did not stand out. Plus, that's a beauty of this country, even today, in my opinion, that there are very few people who know whose ancestors came on Mayflower, okay? So they cannot tell you, oh, you're an immigrant. What they do, they do, especially today. But if you ask, oh, how about your background, So there are a lot of people that are first, second, third generation, if they even know, 4th generation. So anyway, I was accepted. I had never had issues with being, singled out as a foreigner or anything like that. And I think that's the beauty of this country. And I have friends, relatives who are in other European countries, and I don't think they can say the same thing.
So what do we underestimate about the immigrant experience?
Again, it depends. For example, time. I'll give you an example. Time is quite, and I mean time in terms of, is it today or is it 50 years ago when I came? For example, I had no idea that as an immigrant, I was eligible for draft because the Vietnam War was still very much on. And so I got the little registration thing and blah, blah, blah. I could have gone to Vietnam. Now, I had student deferment for 2 years because I went to to Brooklyn Poly. But then they came up with a lottery. I was still eligible for draft, and they came up with a lottery where, depending on when your birthday was, you got a number. And I got a number like 328, which basically meant I would not be going anywhere. So those are kinds of things that people don't know. Of course, that does not, it doesn't apply today. But that is one kind of thing. Well, today, maybe the job situation, because of the pandemic, it may be extremely difficult for an immigrant to get a job. Of course, the language. I'm sorry, you were going.
No, I was just going to say. So there are all these unknowns. You're saying when you're looking at living, there's something about imagining a situation somewhere else, and then there's something different you're saying about actually being there and living in the consequences of the time that you couldn't have predicted. Like you thought about coming to America because of education and the acceptance of being an immigrant, perhaps. But then the consequence of going to you could have been sent right back out to Vietnam.
Exactly.
And that would have changed your whole perspective.
I had a Brooklyn Poly. I roomed with two other kids, and one of them was an immigrant from Ireland, and he came in 1966, and he was drafted. He spent 2 years in Vietnam. So, this is not something that even he didn't know, and he didn't come from a communist country with limited amount of information. So, yeah, but one other thing, Rabbi, that makes a lot of difference is age. See, I was 21 when I arrived in New York on April 1, 1969. When you are that young, and I was independent, I did not have parents to worry about or siblings and so on. So even though I had no clue what was going to happen, with the young age that I sort of believed in myself, and I thought, I'll figure something out. It's much more difficult and different for people in their 40s. And I have friends like that. They had work, and one was a lawyer, but that meant nothing in this country. His law degree was nonsense. So the other one was a radio announcer, also very difficult. And so, some of these Russian Jews that emigrated, they came. Some of them even came in at older age, and that is extremely difficult. Yeah.
So before we get to our last question, can you speak a minute about moving? So there was one thing to move to New York, but Akron is a different ballgame. So what was it like when you moved to Akron and raising your family here? In terms of did your Slovakian background or your being an immigrant have any impact on your experience in Akron?
Not really. I lived in Albany for 10 years, Albany, New York, before we came to Akron. I coined, people say, well, it's Midwest. I call it Far East because it's not the real Midwest, but it's not the East, but it's so far. Excuse me. It is so far west that
not the East Coast either.
It's not. That's right. So it's really the Far East. And so, anyway, I don't know what else I
What would your kids say?
Well, my kids, as I said, one of them lives in Oakland, the other one lives in Park City. The kids were very happy to go through Akron Public Schools, actually. They both were very accomplished in different ways. So they would, again, but now we're talking 20 plus years different. My older son was president of his class. and he was president of the band. He's very musical. The younger one was the extremely accomplished soccer player, and he was a captain, co-captain of the Firestone soccer team. Both of them, this is actually interesting, just came to my mind. Their Firestone High School had, I don't know if they still have it, an award. Now I forget exactly what it's called, but it is something that the classmates vote for the person, two persons, a girl and a boy, that would get the award as the whatever, the king. No, it's the most popular or person. And both of my sons were actually elected for this in their senior year. So I actually was very proud. And they would say, yeah, they have very good recollections for Akron.
Well, I mean, it sounds like you're the risks you took and the moving and it paid off. It created a nice life for. I mean, you're quite accomplished professionally, and you lived a nice life. You've stayed in Akron, and your kids seem to have gotten a good education and are doing well. It seems like it was a good choice.
I think so. Yeah. Again, looking back at my high school classmates they went to college, but there was sort of a lost generation after the invasion of Czechoslovakia because of the very conservative, rigid communist system that came as a result of this invasion. So for 1 second, I never never regretted my decision.
What do you think have you ever thought about what would have happened if you would have gone back to Czechoslovakia, what your life would have looked like?
Well, again, it's a long story because of my family background. I probably would have been able to finish the college. Whether I would get a job or any reasonable job, that remains a question because of my family background. So we'll never know.
So we're just about out of time. I want to ask you one last question, which is, given the world today, if there's somebody, if you could meet the equivalent of you at 20 years old, who today is living in a country where they don't see a bright future for themselves, and they look towards America, what would you tell them?
Well, again, there's a little distinction that has to be made. There are political immigrants or refugees, and then there are economic ones. So the political ones are the ones who usually fear for their life. The economical, that's more difficult. What I would say, especially to somebody who feels that their life may be threatened, because of the political situation in the country, I would say by all means. Again, it depends on the family situation. I was really lucky in a way because my parents agreed with my decision. And, they had mixed feelings, I'm sure, that as a Jewish family, a lot of Jews emigrated after World War II to United States, Western Europe, and so on. My parents did not, because they had a lot of relatives and they didn't have the courage to do that. Going back to your question, yeah, it would depend on the family situation. If it's a young person, is he or she going to decide to leave by himself or herself and leave the parents, behind? What I'm going to tell you one story quick. It is hard. My parents came to say goodbye to me before I left for the U.S. and they came to Paris because the government in Czechoslovakia didn't shut the border down for like 9 months after the invasion for all kinds of reasons. So they were able to come. And, oh, I'm going to choke. We spent like I spent few days with them in Paris. And then, it was time to say goodbye. I went with them to the railway station, and they were in the car already. They rolled down the window in the aisle, and it was the first time I ever saw my father cry. We had no idea what was going to happen. My mother, she cried more often, but the father I never saw before, and I never saw him cry after. So it was sort of tough. And when I went back after the train left, I just walked through the Paris street, and I was crying. Well, anyway.
It's a hard decision you made. You're still quite a kid when you're 20, and yet you were making a big decision to leave. That's
exactly. Yeah.
I mean, we see that. Look, we cry when our kids go off to college, and that's usually just a few hours away, and they're going to be back in a few months. So that to have a child going across the world and not know when you're going to see them next, and in the midst of an uncertain European future, that's I'm sure that was tough.
Yeah.
I want to share with people that that this is really just the beginning of this conversation. That you've been invited, rightfully so, to be the speaker for this year's for the Jewish Akron Yom HaShoah commemoration. And so on April 8th, we hope everybody will join us. It'll be by Zoom. It'll be a virtual gathering this year, but we will get to hear a different part of Vlad's story, which is you've translated your mother's diary. So maybe could you just say one quick sentence or two about what that is, so that people understand what you'll be talking about. April 8th at 7 o'clock, you'll be getting information about it. But
yeah,
just a quick word about your mother's diary.
Just it's pretty amazing story by itself, because the diary was only found by my sister, who lives in Germany, in 2019, so 2 years ago. And she emptied our parents' apartment when they died in 2003, and she brought a lot of stuff to her house in Germany. She boxed it, and she didn't look at anything. And she started cleaning her house now. She's going to be 75 this summer. So she started cleaning, and she went through some of these boxes, and she found this diary that my mother wrote in Slovakia. That was Czechoslovakia fell apart, and it was in Slovakia. The Slovak state was a really very anti-Semitic government, and they basically deported 2/3 of the Jews. And anyway, the diary starts in summer of 1940 and ends in summer or late spring of 1942. That was, especially the 42 was the worst time in Slovakia, when they deported like 58,000 Jews within like 7 months. And the diary, and I'll be able only really to go through the second part of it, which deals more with this horrific situation that the Jews in Slovakia had to go through. It's different from what we've heard from survivors at Yom HaShoah before. This is written as it happened. And she was a pretty good writer. And, I don't want to advertise myself, but it's a pretty shocking story of what was happening in this rabidly anti-Semitic country of Slovakia in 1942.
Yeah, so once again, it's April 8th at 7 p.m. You'll be getting information about it. and I'm so glad that the committee chose you to share that. You've worked for these last few years on translating this diary, and hopefully we're one of many groups that gets to hear the words and get to know your mom's story. What a way to bring her memory to life and to allow us to hear her voice now in 2021. So thank you so much for being our guest this evening and for sharing this part of your story. Chapter 1, we'll call it, and hopefully everybody will join for Chapter 2 also.
Well, thank you very much for having me. Thank you.
Thank you, Vlad, once again, letting your story become part of our story. It's reminds us how important it is, all the people who helped you along the way, and look at all of the good that came from you making your home in our community here, not only in Akron, but in America. And so we hope that we can look out at the world and find future Vlads that will be a part of our world as well. We want to take a moment now to turn our prayers towards those who are in need of help, those who are suffering in this moment, who are looking for healing. The words of Misha Berach, page 253 in our prayer books, as we invite you to share any names in the chat or aloud in your own home.
Misha Berach Avotenu Mekor HaBracha Leimotenu. May the source of strength, who blessed the ones before us, help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say Amen. Misha Berach Imotenu Mekor HaBracha Leavotenu. Bless those in need of healing with Refuah Shalema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say Amen.
Page 282, we invite you to rise for the words of Aleinu.
Aleinu l'shabeach l'adon hakol, l'tekenu l'aleatzer v'reishit, shelo asanu k'goyei haratzot, v'lo samanu k'mishpachot ha'adama, shelo samchakenu kahim, v'gorolenu k'chamonam, v'anachnu korim, u'mishtachavim u'modim, lifnei melech Malchei Hamlachim HaKadosh Baruch Hu. V'ne'emar v'haya Adonai lemelech al kol haaretz bayom ha'u yiyeh Adonai echad u'shemo
As we walk back through the journeys our families have taken, we especially think of those people. For many of us, the people who, like Vlad, brought our family to where we are. And we take time now to remember especially those that we've lost recently and those that we've lost at this time in years past. In this past month, our community has lost Molly Cross-Jeter, Alan Gersman, Jerry Hendon, Mark Embley, and Les Radwani Jr. We add to their names Irene Alexander, Sandra L. Allison, Jean Baer, Baruch Bricklin, Jacob Calderon, Eleanor Chatkin, Joy W. Corman, Gail Frost, Gary Fromson, Ann Greenfield, Herman B. Harris, Evelyn Odom Hilton, Lois Holtzel, Harriet Isroff, Frida Sweedler Jackson, Evelyn C. Katz, Helen A. Katz, Carl Cook, Albert Kondritzer, Tilly B. Lando, Dr. Norman Leeds, William Lieberman, Jerry Lipman, David Lakshan, Ratko Mirik, Melvin W. Meerman, Olivia Newman, Abraham Polsky, Rose Sarah Radwani, Clarence Siegel, Leah Seltzer, Alex Schulman, Thelma Tybee Sweedler, Eli Tapper, Sina Triber, Blossom Waxman, and Joseph E. West. If there are names I mispronounced or names that you would like to include in our yahrzeit list this evening, we encourage you to say those names aloud or to place them in the chat as we rise, page 294. Yitgadal v'yitkadash shemei rabbah.
Amen.
Be'alma divrach irutei v'yamlich malchutei, b'chayechon uv'yomechon uv'chayei dechol beit Yisrael, b'agala uv'izman kariv v'imru. Amen. Yehei shmei rabbah mevarach le'olam olmei olmaya, yitbarak v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh, v'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shemei dekudasha b'richu. Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata, tushbechata v'nechamata, da'amiran be'alma v'imru. Amen. Yehei shlama rabba min shemaya, v'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru. Amen. Osei shalom b'mromav, hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru. Amen. May the one who creates harmony on high bring peace to us, to all Israel, and to all the world as we say, Amen. Having connected with those that we've loved and lost, let us connect with each other as we reach out through this technology, become one community, and bless each other with the words of the priests. May God bless you and keep you. May God's light shine upon you and be gracious unto you. Whatever journey life takes you on, may you know that God's presence is with you, and may that journey bring you to find peace. We raise a glass now, and we invite you to join us as we say the words of Kiddush and bless our challah with the words of Motzi.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, borei peri hagafen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'ratzavanu, v'shabbat kodesho b'ahava uvratzon hinchilanu. Zikaron lemasi v'reishit, ki hu yamet techila lemikra kodesh, zecher l'tziyat Mitzrayim, ki vanu v'cherta v'yotanu kidashta mikol amim. V'shabbat kodshecha be'ahava uvratzon hinchatanu. Baruch atah Adonai mekadosh HaShabbat. Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, hamotzi lechem min haaretz. Amen.
A couple quick announcements. First, we thank Eli for joining us back again with Cantor Kathy for our music this evening. And once again, thanks Vladimir Roth for being our speaker this evening and sharing his story. Please check your weekly email. There is tons of information in the weekly email. Scroll down. For most of us, we see it on our phone. It's a quick thumb swipe. Go down and find all the information of upcoming programs. Our programming schedule is really back up to full speed, even though we're virtual. We have found ways in which we can do just about anything we were doing in person almost a year ago. We can now do it online. And so we are into our Interfaith Justice series. It's on the next 3 Wednesdays. We hope that you will join us for that. This Sunday, we have a program on how to plan for healthy aging at 10:30, and Lunch and Learns starting next week as well. The Nature and Human Nature series, Thoughts About Humanity's Place in the World, led by Marty Cohen, who's been leading a number of our Lunch and Learns. And finally, if you are looking for, if you're frustrated or have been unable to find a way to get your COVID-19 vaccine, Audrey Baker is our representative helping people to get appointments. So you will find in that email her contact information. Please reach out to her if you are in need of getting an appointment, and we want everybody to make sure to get vaccinated as quickly as they can. So Shabbat Shalom, everybody. Thank you so much. Let's make sure to be a voice out there for refugees and people who are seeking a better life, just as our families have found. And we'll close our service with the words of Adon Olam as we pray for our world to be the fullest sense of what it should be for everybody, as we pray for their safety and for them to flourish as we have. Adon Olam. Shabbat Shalom.
Adon Olam asher malach b'terem kol yitzir nivra li'ed nasa v'chefso kol azay melech shemo nikra azay melech shemo nikra ve'achari kichot hakol levado yimlok nara והוא היה, והוא הווה, והוא יהיה בתפארה, והוא יהיה בתפארה, בידו אבקיד רוחי, ועת תישן ויהירה, ועם רוחי גביעתי, אדוני לי ולא יירא. Adonai li velo ira. Shabbat Shalom.